Uh-huh. I just feel like I've been around the block, ripping up fantasy stock, working around the clock. Look at the view from the top. Researching rookies a lot? No, I just be listening to pods. Yeah, one in particular, I'm just a messenger. Let me just pass on the rock. Browning, brunning, pruning, pronouncing ain't what he's doing. What he's doing is not losing, but infusing you with new things. And there's Dennis the Bennett, yeah. The man is a menace, yeah. Building a dynasty, some of the finest things. Promise you won't regret it. Sly as a fox, cultured in pop. Give him his props. Here is a thought, here is a box, and you cannot compare them at all. So don't even try. Careful with the news, but when you use a take, I take up Tony Fire. I mean Dyer, because anyone else is a huge mistake. Whoa, fantasy round table, fantasy round table, yeah. Fantasy round table. Come take a look at the crown, baby. Hey, fantasy round table, fantasy round table, woo. Fantasy round table. Come take a look at the crown, baby. Go.
Hello and welcome to another episode of the Fantasy Football Roundtable podcast. We are here on a Friday. It is the final week of NFL buys. Also a crucial week. I don't know about you, Dennis. I have some leagues that are starting the playoffs. Most leagues last week of the regular season. I look at my lineup options and part of me wants to cry.
You know, my biggest bye week impact this week is in the Scott Fish Bowl, in which I have my rounds 2 through 7 players all on a bye. And so I am projected to miss the cut by about 40 points. So I am hoping that my backups severely overperform. Most places where I have Jaden Daniels, I've got a third quarterback like Geno Smith or something. Or where I have Mixon, I've got another running back or McLaurin. Like in one league, a 16-teamer, I just happened to start Tim Patrick because McLaurin was on a bye. So now I'm not going to claim to be super smart with that one. I've always liked Tim Patrick. But I didn't expect a game like he had last night.
I had a couple of places where I started Tim Patrick too, and then a couple of places where I was debating about whether to start Tim Patrick, and I went with somebody else, and now I have regrets. But you know, he definitely had quite a night there. It was a good showing for Green Bay. What do you make of kind of their receiving group? Last night, a lot of Christian Watson, but no Jaden Reed. Some weeks it's been a lot of Jaden Reed and no Watson or Doubs. Is it just kind of hit or miss now?
I think in a normal week, it wouldn't have been so drastic. But Detroit ran 31 more plays than Green Bay, outpossessed them by about 14 minutes, 12 minutes, actually. And so Detroit just dominated the time of possession and the ball. With Doubs out, you would have expected a little more from Jaden Reed, I think. But I think it just ended up being a function of game flow. They don't typically ignore, and they're usually pretty good about getting, you know, at least 3 of their wide receivers involved and sometimes 4. But Tucker Kraft had a pretty good game, and Watson and Dontavian Wicks. And ultimately, I think it just ended up being that they ran out of plays. It's kind of like in San Francisco, though. Somebody's always going to get left out when you have 3 wide receivers, a tight end, and a running back that are all fantasy viable assets. And when you only run 45 plays, that makes it hard to get everybody involved unless you have, like, you know, your quarterback is just going off and hitting bombs. And you know, obviously last night, Jordan Love was not doing that. So it was just one of those weeks. They like Jaden. It isn't like they didn't ice out Jaden Reed. They weren't trying to avoid him. It was just one of those weeks that happens. And when you play fantasy, you have to take that good with the bad. It happens to the best of fantasy players. Even sometimes you expect it maybe a little more with lesser players. But, there are times when, an A.J. Brown or a CeeDee Lamb or something, when everything is clicking, will still have a dud game.
Well, the Lions now 12-1, 9-4 for the Green Bay Packers. Both those teams still looking pretty good for the playoffs. Let's move to the rest of the Week 14 games. Some teams that are hoping to get in the playoff picture, but there are a lot of matchups, Dennis, I have to be honest, that our teams going nowhere in a hurry, and that's certainly the case with our first one, the 2-10 Jacksonville Jaguars at the 3-9 Tennessee Titans. We debated whether Trevor Lawrence should be shut down for the year. He appears to have been. He was put on IR, effectively ending his season, so we know it's Mac Jones. But what are we doing with this Jaguars backfield? We have not seen a lot of consistency from Travis Etienne, but it hasn't been like Tank Bigsby is lighting it up of late either. In a week with all these teams on a bye and other injuries, you'd like to have something from a team that's in action. How are you feeling about those guys?
I think the best thing I can say about some of these games is that it's bad teams against bad teams. So they're kind of evenly matched. And so there should be able to be some fantasy production available. Mac looked a little bit better, his second game than he did his first game. I don't think he's a savior by any stretch of the imagination. Do I think with the right coaching, he could turn into a serviceable quarterback? Maybe, probably. The running game, though, ETN provides the pop and Bigsby provides the bulk. They just haven't been able to really get going. ETN sitting at RB38 and Bigsby at RB36. And most of Bigsby's work was done earlier in the season with ETN out. Since week 9, ETN, though, is RB41. But Bigsby is RB76 since week 9. I know he's been dinged up, but it just doesn't feel like there's viability there with either one of them. But based on where you probably drafted ETN, you're going to play him and hope for some flex-worthy production. And with Bigsby, if he's playing, you may look at him and go, well, what are my other options? There's 6 teams on a bye with a lot of fantasy assets out. I'm not rushing to get either one of them into my lineups, but I could see a world where, they combine for 22 points.
Yeah, we'll have to see. I mean, the good news for Jaguars fans, both those guys coming back next year, they picked up ATN's option and Bigsby only going into year 3. So the Titans passing game has been a little bit better of late. We've talked about Nick Westbrook-Ikini on Tuesday and his covert touchdowns, but how are you feeling about Calvin Ridley?
I like where Ridley's at. He's getting volume, and the biggest challenge I think both Tennessee receivers have there is that while the numbers don't always look at face value, Levis hasn't been terribly accurate. He's not throwing a lot of really easily catchable balls, but he's throwing good volume. They have a narrow funnel in Tennessee. It's Ridley and it's the NWI. So I don't mind. I think Ridley's startable. He's wide receiver 29 on the season. Westbrook-Ikini is wide receiver 52, but he's wide receiver 14 since week 6. And that's honestly, on the back of 6 touchdowns in 8 games. So I think both of them are startable as wide receiver 3, 4, maybe 5, which a wide receiver 5 is often a flex play. So, I'm okay. I think it's better than rolling the dice, especially against the Jaguars. I'd feel better rolling out Westbrook Akini and Calvin Ridley than some of these other options.
I am taking the Titans in this one.
I'm gonna too. I like the Titans at home. I like it to be maybe a surprisingly productive game for fantasy because both teams are not great. So it's a decent matchup.
Next up, we have the 3-9 New York Jets at the 5-7 Miami Dolphins. Just another peach of a matchup. Brees Hall downgraded to doubtful today, which means he's unlikely to play. What are you doing with the Jets backfield?
Well, we've seen Braylon Allen, showing my age there.
It happens.
Braylon Allen has looked good when he's gotten chances. He's a beast of a running back at about 235 pounds. I'm trying to find my depth chart here and see. I forget who they're.
Beyond that, it's Isaiah Davis, who we saw a little bit last week, kind of as a receiving back. They released Abonaconda, so getting thinner.
Yeah, and I would expect this is going to be an Aaron Rodgers 50 pass attempt game. I think he's not going to run the ball a lot.
God help us all, 50 passes.
But I do think that Allen can produce. He's big and he's fast, and he's shown his ability to carry the ball effectively and catch the ball effectively. So I like Allen as a flex play, but I think Rodgers is going to throw the ball a lot.
It looks like, just to answer your question, beyond Allen and Isaiah Davis, they have Kenny Nwangwu. That's it listed as on their depth chart.
Well, we'll see what happens. They'll have to elevate somebody, I bet.
Maybe we can finally get Garrett Wilson and Devontae Adams going, though.
Right. Well, if we see anything with Jameis Winston, if there's volume to be had, it can be good.
But don't the Dolphins have some good secondary pieces? I think Jalen Ramsey's still there too.
Yeah.
So, speaking of the Dolphins, it's been an interesting roller coaster with Tyreek Hill and Jalen Waddle. Neither of them have felt like lead pipe locks of late. What are you doing with them this week?
Sauce Gardner's a little bit. I don't know if he's banged up or sick. I remember seeing
he's doubtful as well. He's likely to miss.
And the Jets defense has been playing well since Tua's return. Tyreek Hill has gone from wide receiver 20 to he's currently wide receiver 20, but he's wide receiver 15 since Tua's return. And Jalen Waddle is wide receiver 40, but he's wide receiver 27 since Tua's return. So even though Jonnu Smith seems to be stealing all the headlines, and Devin Achane is, garnering a big share of first read targets, both Hill and Waddle are healthy-ish for this time of year, and with Tua back, they are getting opportunities and being fairly productive with them. I think it's going to be a good game. They're playing in Miami, so they don't have to deal with any cold. And so I'm going to go ahead and bank on them, playing well. And I'm taking the Dolphins. Well, I'm not on my game tonight.
I'm taking the Dolphins too. I just saw it looks like Alan Lazard is going to be activated from IR ahead of Sunday's game. So you just know he's the one that's going to vulture. Yeah, he's the one that's going to vulture all the touchdowns. One of the actual good matchups this week is the 6-6 Atlanta Falcons at the 10-2 Minnesota Vikings. Dennis, a homecoming for Kirk Cousins, who was with the Vikings for several years. He has struggled in the last couple of games, but a lot of pressure on the Falcons to try to get it turned around. How are you feeling about him?
Cousins is QB 20 on the year. So for fantasy, he's startable in Superflex. But the last 4 weeks, he's QB 31. He's had, 6 interceptions and no TDs in the last 3 games.
Indeed.
He's been in a funk, and he hasn't been throwing the ball well. It isn't like he's missing because he's overthrowing people and getting picked off. He just hasn't looked very good, and his arm has not looked very strong. So Well, I like Cousins as a professional quarterback, and I would expect he'll bounce back. Is this the week against the Minnesota Vikings and Brian Flores? You know, if I have him as my QB2 in Superflex, I'm probably going to put him in my lineup. But if I have another option that I think could be productive, I could probably be talked out of it.
Meanwhile, for the Vikings, Cousins, one of his favorite targets was Justin Jefferson. He's still a great receiver, but he's been a little quieter of late, has not caught a touchdown since October 20th, has not had 100 yards receiving since November 3rd. Do you suspect maybe a bigger game here with Cousins coming back to town?
Well, I think if I'm Minnesota, they're probably taking Cousins out of the mix and not really worrying about it on the offensive side of the ball. The Falcons give up the 7th most fantasy points to wide receivers and the 5th most receptions and 3rd most touchdowns to wide receivers. And on top of that, Atlanta gets the 3rd fewest sacks. So Darnold is going to not be pressured and have lots of time to get the ball to Justin Jefferson. This feels like a get-right game for Jefferson.
I think the Falcons are up against the wall. I'm taking the Falcons in this one.
I'm taking the Vikings.
Next up, we have a barn burner, the 4-8 New Orleans Saints, who have no receivers, against the 2-10 New York Giants, who have no offensive prospects whatsoever. Dennis, apart from Marquez Valdez-Scantling, with Taysom Hill now going on IR as well, is there a pass catcher from the Saints that you are interested in?
So MVS is wide receiver 18 since week 10. So you're firing him up. As far as receiving threats go, obviously it's Alvin Kamara. He leads the team in targets and is second in targets per game behind Rashid Shaheed, who's out with an injury. Olave, he got injured. But Kamara is still doing his thing. The other wild card is, I was looking, Juwan Johnson is playing 60% of the snaps, and Foster Moreau is playing 70% of the snaps. So they're playing a lot of 2 tight end. Johnson's tight end 28, and Moreau is tight end 36. I know I texted you earlier this week because I've got a tight end conundrum, and you said Moreau and over Okonkwo and
well, I just feel like Okonkwo either is going to get you that 70-yard touchdown or Jack. And Moreau has some kind of connection with Carr. I ended up playing him in a couple places too. It is just grim.
Well, I actually think I might go out and get Grant Calcaterra because I have Dallas Goedert's my starter, and Goddard's going to be out. So that was my other option.
I saw he returned to practice, I thought it said.
Oh, I thought
yeah, he's out. You're right. They ruled him out. So he got in practice enough for them to be like, no, bro, we're not playing you. Yeah, hey, that's good though. Devontae Smith's supposed to come back, so maybe balance.
Juwan Johnson has the 2nd most receptions on the active roster, despite playing 10% fewer snaps than Moreau. Moreau only has 25 snaps. It seemed like earlier in the season Moreau was starting to trend up a little bit, and then it seems more like now he's their inline tight end. Juwan Johnson's the move tight end. So I like MVS, Kamara, and probably Juwan Johnson. I don't know about Cedric Wilson or Mason Tipton.
Mason Tipton guys doesn't seem to get targets at all. Johnson did step up a little bit after Hill went out last week. The only reason I still keep a small flame alive for Moreau is you're right, he doesn't seem to get a lot of snaps or targets, but where he does seem to get targeted from our friend Derek Carr is in the red zone. So honestly, Johnson could end up catching 3 for 30 and you could get 1 for 10 and a touchdown from Moreau and be happier about that. They may just try to run a lot. I don't know. For the Giants, I was getting a little excited, speaking of tight ends, about Theo Johnson. We saw him getting more and more involved, and then he got injured. So now he is on IR. But we're to the point in the Giants season where it's mostly about looking at the future. And Tyrone Tracy looks like he could be an interesting prospect for the future. Malik Neighbors, Wandale there. How do you feel about Theo Johnson? Is that a guy you might, if you had an IR spot, try to pick up and stash or hide away?
Yeah, if he's out there in Dynasty and you can grab him, I say grab him. I don't expect he's out there. If I don't think he's not a guy that you would grab in a keeper league unless there's some rules that dictate, how you need to keep players, and it pushes you towards only rookies and only players drafted in your draft after a certain point or something. I like Theo Johnson. He blew past Daniel Bellinger, who looked pretty good the year before they brought in Darren Waller. It seems like Johnson is the tight end future there. They need to figure out their quarterback position because it'd be a damn shame to waste Malik Neighbors' rookie contract and Tyrone Tracy's #2 to 3 year window. But I like Johnson. I think he's definitely somebody that like in Dynasty, if I'm wheeling and dealing, if I can get him thrown in or added to a trade so I can stash him until next year, he might not be a top 10 tight end next year, but 2 years from now, I think he could be up there.
Yeah, I mean, I was just getting excited. He had 5 or more targets in every one of his 4 games in November. Ends up with 29 for 331 and a touchdown, which doesn't sound incredible, but you have to remember the Giants' offense. The word incredible has not been used in a positive way for them. Speaking of which, I'm taking the Saints.
I'm going to take the Saints too because, like I said in Scott Fishbowl, I need a go-off game from MVS, man.
Next up, the 3-9 Carolina Panthers at the 10-2 Philadelphia Eagles. It's been a couple games now. How are we feeling about the backfield split between Chuba Hubbard and Jonathan Brooks?
So has Brooks played 2 weeks or was last week his first week?
I think he's played 3 weeks.
Yeah.
But because Miles has been on IR for a couple of weeks.
So Chuba's sitting at RB13. He's averaged 74%. He's played 74% of the snaps this season. He actually played 79% last week with Brooks only playing 21%. I think you're rolling Chuba out there and you're going to ride Chuba. I think Brooks is going to have to – he's going to have to be one of the – he's going to have to be like Sean Tucker or Bucky Irvin to grab a steady share of opportunity. If they had not signed Hubbard to the extension, I would feel a lot better about Brooks getting an opportunity when things don't go quite right. But unless he's breaking off big runs, I think right now they're going to put him in for a play to spell Hubbard here and there. But I just don't think they're not at the point this year where they're going to be like, hey, this is your series, or every third series is yours kind of a approach. I think Brooks is going to continue to be a fringe player, 25% of the snaps. And Hubbard is, just because he's good in all 3 phases of the game and he's been playing well this year, I think they're going to keep riding it with Hubbard.
So you're right. 2 weeks. Brooks had 2 carries for 7 yards in his first game against the Chiefs. Last week, 6 carries for 18 yards, 3 targets, caught all 3 for 23, but only 8 carries for 25 yards, 3 receptions for 23 yards so far this season. So not exactly lighting it up. Somebody who is lighting it up is Saquon Barkley. You mentioned on Tuesday he's sitting at 1,499 rushing yards with 5 games to play. People are not just talking about him getting to 2,000 on the ground, which seems reasonable given the way he's going, but he only needs to average, I think, a shade under 125 yards a game to break Eric Dickerson's single season rushing record, which has stood since, I think they said the 80s.
Yeah, 121.2 yards.
Do you see it happening?
That's 121 yards a game is high to, could it happen? It could. Are they going to like try to make it happen? They might, but they want to, they're Philadelphia is chasing Detroit. So they're not, I don't think they're not going to push Saquon for that record at the expense of the game plan. Yeah, he's only playing 74% of the snaps, which is his lowest snap share since 2021. But he's on a super explosive team, super productive team. I would give it less than a 50-50 chance, but I won't be surprised if he does.
So here's his schedule. Panthers this week, which you figure gold. But then home for the Steelers. They definitely have a defensive front. At the Commanders, that's, he had a huge game when they played the first time, but that, they have a decent defense. Then home for the Cowboys, home for the Giants. I think that if he's within 300 yards when they start that homestand at the end of the season, they're going to try to get it for him. But I think it's the next 3 games that really, if he averages over 100 yards a game the next, and I mean, would it shock you if he went for like 170 against the Panthers? They're not incredible.
Yeah, it wouldn't at all. I think that I think when they look at the schedule, it's almost they almost have to go, well, look, if we can get another monster game to offset what's going to happen against Pittsburgh and Washington, then we go against Dallas and the Giants, 2 division games. And I could see if they need 200 yards going against the Giants, I could see them like just force feeding them against the Giants.
I'm taking the Eagles.
So am I.
Next up, the 3-9 Cleveland Browns, off of a pretty white-hot offensive performance in Denver, are at the 9-3 Pittsburgh Steelers. The Browns beat the Steelers 2 weeks ago. David Njoku saw 17 targets on Monday night. 17. How are you feeling about him coming into this one?
So he's averaging 9 targets a game over his last 5 games. He's sitting at tight end 11. He's tight end 5 since week 6. He has certainly got chemistry with Jameis Winston. Winston's averaging 46 attempts a game. So there's volume there to be had for Njoku, for Elijah Moore, for Jerry Jeudy. They're not afraid to throw. It boggles my mind that Cleveland spent so much of this year going, nah, Deshaun's our guy. We're going to throw the ball 22 times a game at 50% completion rate. When they had Jameis Winston sitting on their bench, the change has been just crazy. And Winston's, averaging almost 46 attempts a game. It's bonkers.
Meanwhile, looking at tight ends for the Steelers, Russell Wilson getting a little something going with Pat Freiermuth the last couple of games. He's seen 11 targets. He's caught 10 passes for a little over 120 yards and a touchdown the last couple of weeks. So how are you feeling about Freiermuth?
I like Freiermuth. He's always been if not super exciting, a relatively consistent tight end. He's your classic 2-way tight end, good blocker, physical, pretty athletic. He's not like 6'8" like Darnell Washington, who's backing him up. Washington's been grabbing some attention, but Freiermuth is playing well. And so I think because Washington's playing well, I think it allows Freiermuth to get a little more involved in the passing game. He's coming off his high game for receptions and yardage. He's second on the team in targets. Now, Calvin Austin is closing fast on the target front. Austin is putting together a nice little season here. But I think Freiermuth is getting, he's pushing for a must-start level. Is he going to be tight end 3? Probably not. But I think it's safe to expect him to be, somewhere between 8 and 12 pretty much every week.
I am taking the Steelers at home.
So am I.
Next up, the 2-10 Las Vegas Raiders at the 6-6 Tampa Bay Buccaneers. Dennis Zamir White ruled out again. Alexander Madison still highly questionable with that ankle injury, has missed the last couple of weeks. They have Sincere McCormick. They have Amir Abdullah. What are you doing with this backfield?
Well, I'm crossing my fingers that we get some certainty on Alexander Madison because I'd love to be able to stick Sincere McCormick in my lineup with some confidence. McCormick looked pretty good last week. He was RB 36 on 14 touches. He didn't get in the end zone. But in college at where was he? Texas San Antonio, he had 2 1,400 plus yard seasons, and he caught 66 passes. The big knock on him, he ran a 4.6 at the combine, so he's 5'9" and 205 pounds, and then he ran a 4.6 40. But he seems like he's got pretty good vision, and we've seen it a lot of times with backs that. Would you rather have a 4.6 back with excellent vision or a 4.3 back that can't see where the hole is? You're going to take the 4.6 guy all the time because you would rather have 5, 6, 7 yards just about every play, than 0, 0, 0. So I like McCormick. I think if Madison is out, it will allow the Raiders to use Abdullah as a passing down back, and McCormick is more of the running back with each one. Abdullah will get a couple carries, McCormick will get a couple targets, and maybe they can get in the end zone.
Honestly, I'm with you. I'm not feeling if Madison's active, I think that almost makes this worse. If he's not active, I'm just not excited about any of them. I don't think it's a great matchup against Tampa Bay either. So
no.
Speaking of Tampa Bay, for a couple of weeks there, Cade Otton was a man on fire, a man possessed. But as we've seen, Bucky Irving picking up his production. They still have Rashad White. Now Mike Evans is back. The last few weeks, he's been awfully quiet. How are you feeling about him?
So Otton is sitting at tight end 8, but he's tight end 29 over the last 2 weeks since Mike Evans came back. A lot of Otton's production, he benefited from Godwin and Evans both being out. And, teams work really hard to develop depth, but when you lose 2 receivers the caliber of Evans and Godwin, it's pretty hard to replace both of them. Now, the running game is picked up in Tampa. I think with Evans healthy, Baker is going to be trying to push the ball at him. They want to try to get him another 1,000-yard season, and he's their best asset in the passing game. Otton he's tough to start right now based on the last 2 weeks. Even with Ertz and Gesicki and Dalton Schultz, and I forget who the other bye teams are, but I still don't think I could start Otton.
Yeah, I mean, you probably weren't starting a Denver tight end, but Baltimore, Houston, Cincinnati, Cincinnati's playing Baltimore, Houston, Indianapolis. You probably weren't starting tight ends out of there. There's not as many big tight ends on the bench, but I'm with you. I think Otton's more in the tight end 2 range for me. I am taking the Buccaneers.
So am I.
Next up, the 7-5 Seattle Seahawks at the 6-6 Arizona Cardinals. This is a battle for first place in the NFC West. These 2 teams met really recently, just 2 weeks ago in Week 12. That was a 16-6 Seahawks win at home. Geno Smith has just been okay the last few weeks. He has, when they met the last time 2 weeks ago, he had 250 yards, a TD, and an INT. A lot of teams on the bye this week. Gino's been a little up and down this season, been just kind of mediocre of late. How are you feeling about him?
I think he's a solid QB2. It depends on what I need this week. If I'm like, I need a Hail Mary, then I might go Kyler Murray because he's the one who might be able to give me some ceiling with his running game. If I'm like, well, I can forego a super high ceiling as long as I get a pretty decent floor, then that's Geno Smith territory. He's QB 21 since week 8. But QB 12 on the season. So he's been cold the last few weeks. Getting him back, in sync with JSN and DK Metcalf, if he can stay healthy. I think the big thing that the Seahawks need to get going is Kenneth Walker. He's dinged up with an oblique, and the last time he was out, Zach Charbonnet got a ton of work. So I wish that Walker was healthy enough to carry his normal load, because then I'm getting fantasy points there. He's explosive and he's powerful. If he's a little bit dinged up and keeps playing, then him and Charbonnet both kind of have depressed value. And then it's like, well, let me get something out of JSN, who seems to have, he's kind of ascended to the wide receiver 1 now for the Seahawks. DK has a certain role that he plays that can be super productive, but it can also disappear at times. I think JSN is a little more consistent.
Meanwhile, the last time these two teams played, Trey McBride, 15 targets, caught 12 passes. But Marvin Harrison Jr., a little quieter, only had 3 for 47. Do you think he can get more involved on Sunday?
Oh, he can. Will Kyler get him more involved? That's a great question. He's wide receiver 25 on the year. If you're rostering him, you didn't draft him at wide receiver 29 value. You drafted him in the probably late first to at the latest mid-second round. He's not been returning that. Some of it is Kyler not getting him the ball efficiently. Some of it is calling plays that don't, match his strong suit. I like Harrison. If you roster him, you got to have a pretty stacked team to bench him. But expecting, RB or wide receiver 1 or 2 productivity out of him is probably a fool's game. Play him. Hopefully he's flex worthy. He should be.
I'm going to take the Cardinals at home.
I'm going Seahawks. Taking the fighting JSNs.
Next up, the 10-2 Buffalo Bills at the 6-6 Los Angeles Rams. Dennis, Keon Coleman, questionable. Still has that wrist injury. He's missed the last couple of games. Dalton Kincaid has missed the last couple. He's listed as questionable with knee injury. How are we feeling about the Bills' pass catchers?
I think it's shaken out fairly consistently. Khalil Shakir sitting at wide receiver 30, and he's the guy that's going to get the volume of targets. He's the one I'm most comfortable playing. I think, honestly, if Kincaid and Cooper and Coleman were all healthy, I think I'm still most comfortable playing Khalil Shakir. He's got some explosiveness to him. I've talked earlier in the season about his athletic profile matching up very well with Amon-Ra St. Brown. And so I think using him in that kind of fashion can be very productive. Shakir leads the team in targets and receptions and yards per game. Coleman and Cooper, you play Coleman because he's a dart throw, can make a big play, make a big touchdown catch. Cooper, you play him because he's got a history of being a big-time NFL wide receiver, but Shakir's the guy I want in my roster.
Meanwhile, for the Rams, they have their 2 receivers back and humming along. It's a week where you have 6 QBs on the bye. How are you feeling about Matthew Stafford?
I like Matthew Stafford. It depends on what my options are. He's QB 10 since the week 6 bye. I think a lot of that kind of coincides with Puka Nacua and Cooper Kupp finally getting probably as healthy as they're going to get at this point in the season. Stafford's averaging 34 attempts per game, and 19 of those 34 attempts are going to Kupp and Nacua. It's one of those situations where everybody on God's green earth knows what Matthew Stafford and the Rams are going to do, and they do it anyways.
I'm taking the Bills.
So am I.
Next up, the 4-8 Chicago Bears at the 5-7 San Francisco 49ers. Dennis, been a quiet couple of weeks here for DeAndre Swift. He is limited with a quadriceps injury, but is questionable, has been practicing, so potential to go. Roschon Johnson out with a concussion, so that would limit his competition. How are you feeling about Swift?
I feel a lot better with Roschon Johnson out. I mean, I don't expect Swift to really lose many opportunities to Travis Homer.
They probably regret that they don't still have Khalil Herbert.
You know, they've got Demetric Felton and Darrington Evans on the practice squad, so I'm sure they'll activate at least one of those guys, but that's not going to do much. It's going to be a DeAndre Swift volume game. Unfortunately, it's against the 49ers, who their defense, Nick Bosa is still banged up with an oblique, so I think he's going to be out. I think you start Swift. He's RB19 on the season, so unless you're in a league where you only have to start one running back, Swift is going to be in your lineup. I could see him having top 16 production this week just based on volume. I mean, in fantasy, that's what we want. We want to chase volume, and this game lines up to give DeAndre Swift wouldn't surprise me if it was his high carry mark on the season.
Meanwhile, speaking of injuries for the 49ers, Trent Williams going to be out again. Jordan Mason and Christian McCaffrey both out for the rest of the season. How are you feeling about this 49er backfield?
It was interesting to watch how much money was spent on Isaac Guerendo this week on waivers.
It's true.
And last week on waivers. I think Guerendo brings a lot to the table. He's got good size. He's very fast. He's in an offense that caters to his running style. The potential is there. I think we get hung up. We saw his 73-yard run earlier in the season in mop-up duty, where he went down at the 2 to, grind out the clock and not let the other team have the ball back. So he's clearly a smart football player. But I'm going to temper my expectations. Not that I think the Bears' defense is world beaters, but I mean, Isaac Guerendo is the third stringer for a reason. So,
well, he's really the fourth stringer because Elijah Mitchell's out.
So, if I rostered him, I imagine I would be I don't think that there's enough other running backs available out there that he's going to find his way to the bench. But am I expecting him to put up 25 points? No. But if I got 12 or 13 points out of him, I think I'll be fairly happy.
I am going to take the Bears.
You're pretty gutsy there.
The Bears have been playing really well. I mean, if they had a better clock manager, they may have actually beaten Detroit on Thanksgiving.
Maybe. I'm going to go with the 49ers.
Sunday Night Football, the 8-4 Los Angeles Chargers at the 11-1 Kansas City Chiefs. Dennis, it seems of late that Justin Herbert has only had eyes for Ladd McConkey. He's a little banged up, which has him questionable going into Sunday night. But how are you feeling about him against the Chiefs?
Well, I agree with Justin Herbert. You throw the ball to the guy that gets open and has the good hands, and that's Ladd McConkey. He gets open better than Joshua Palmer, and Palmer's a pretty good wide receiver, but I think Palmer is a wide receiver 3-4 in the NFL. Quentin Johnston, has a couple skills. One of them just happens to be dropping the ball. If he could catch the ball consistently, especially on those crossing patterns, because he's fast and he can run away from people. But McConkey ends up being the guy. I don't know if he's going to continue to be the guy year after year after year, or if he will, default to that team's wide receiver 2 that's very, very productive. He's a wide receiver 2 this year for fantasy. And the Chiefs give up the 6th fewest sacks, but they're top 5 in QB hits and pressures. So they get to the quarterback and hit him. They just do it late. It seems to line up as a good game for Justin Herbert and Ladd McConkey to do a little bit of cooking.
Meanwhile, for the Chiefs, trying to figure out which pass catcher is going to have a good day has been something of a mystery. How are you approaching their pass catchers against a pretty good Chargers defense?
Well, Nuke is sitting at wide receiver 43 and Worthy is at wide receiver 44. If Worthy had better hands, he'd be higher because he would have earned more targets. And we've seen him drop a couple passes that would likely be touchdowns. Juju's still doing Juju stuff, and you just can't count. Unfortunately, you can't count on Justin Watson any more than you can count on Juju, which is too bad. Nuke is the only one I want any part of, and that's, as a wide receiver 3-4. He's not stretching the field. You're hoping he gets enough volume to get double digits and then gets an opportunity to bring in a touchdown to push you up towards 20 points. The Chiefs give up the 12th most sacks in the NFL, and the Chargers get the 7th most sacks. So we'll see if the Chargers are able to get some pressure on Mahomes. If they do, I think we end up seeing, more Isaiah Pacheco, both in the running and the passing game. Travis Kelce will be doing his run around near the line of scrimmage, get open, make stupid plays for annoying first downs if you're a Chargers fan. Worthy, I just can't start Xavier Worthy yet. I like Nuke. I'm not starting Justin Watson or Juju. Worthy would be one of those guys. I'm like, I need a Hail Mary. I'm going to throw him in.
I am going to take the Chargers in this one.
I appreciate your gumption, but I'm going to stick with the Chiefs.
Next up, the 4-8 Cincinnati Bengals at the 5-7 Dallas Cowboys. Welcome to Monday Night Football. Dennis, it was rough in the early going with T. Higgins, couldn't stay on the field, but the last 5 he's been out there and he has been involved. 34 receptions, 459 yards, and 5 touchdowns in his last 5 games. How are you feeling about him?
He's wide receiver 3 in points per game on the year. Unfortunately, he's missed several games. He's got a career high touchdown rate, career high targets, receptions, and yards per game. So on a per game basis, he's performing as good or better than he has during his entire career. He just hasn't been able to, play all of the games. There's been talk like, he's dogging it because he's trying to preserve himself for a free agent contract. But I'm of the belief that these guys don't go out there and do that. They go out, they know that playing well is going to get them a better contract than preserving their bodies by not playing. He's not quite as productive as Jamar Chase, but not a lot of guys are. But I think Higgins does have the ability to be a wide receiver 1 in any given week and a wide receiver 2 without, really putting in a whole lot of effort.
Meanwhile, we figure this might be a higher scoring game with the Bengals. So Jake Ferguson looks like he's tracking toward making a return from a concussion. Brandon Cooks back off of IR, caught a touchdown last week. How are you feeling about those 2 veterans?
Well, whatever weapons Cooper Rush can have at his disposal, is going to be better for Cooper Rush. Unfortunately, they just lost another offensive lineman, I think, and Zach Martin. The offensive line is porous. They tried to replace some veterans with cheap rookies, and it hasn't worked out. Cooper Rush is a serviceable backup, and that's about it. He isn't gonna put the team on his back, and he's no Jameis Winston when he comes off the bench. I want to buy in, but I'm just not buying into Cooper Rush's ability to get both Jake Ferguson and Brandon Cooks involved and keep CD Lamb happy. Which, I'm torn. I picked up Brandon Cooks for the Scott Fish Bowl because I need a wide receiver, and I went back and forth between Cooks and Tolbert, and I just feel like Cooks is going to get a little bit of veteran deference from Mike McCarthy over Jalen Tolbert. I just don't know if Cooper Rush can get the ball to him enough times for it to get me over that hump in SFB. And especially the way Rico Dowdle's been playing at the running back, he's giving them enough confidence to try to run the ball. And we know that Mike McCarthy has never met a stack box he didn't want to run into.
I am taking the Bengals.
So am I.
That'll do it for the Week 14 schedule. Dennis, we have kind of a long Saturday before we get back into NFL action. If the people are looking for something to occupy their time, what can they do?
They can go to their favorite podcast platform, hit that search bar, type in the Fantasy Football Roundtable podcast, give us a like, give us a subscribe, leave us a rating and review. We love that.
Well, that'll do it for us today. We'll be back on Tuesday recapping the Week 14 action and the end of bye weeks. Hopefully you guys manage to fill your lineups and do well here as the regular season or the playoffs get underway. We will see you on Tuesday. Have a great weekend.